3 months after Operation Awakening, Earth looked completely different from the peaceful world the Ethereals had tried to create. Cities buzzed with activity as humans worked frantically to understand captured alien technology and prepare for what everyone knew would be a much larger conflict. The artificial calm that had settled over humanity during the occupation had been replaced by the fierce energy of a species fighting for its survival and freedom. Jake had been promoted to admiral in the newly reformed Human Defense Force, a military organization that drew on the best elements of all Earth's former armed services. His first major task was overseeing the interrogation of captured ethereal administrators and learning everything possible about the collective's structure, technology, and weaknesses. Administrator Veltharion had been surprisingly cooperative once he accepted that humanity would not return to peaceful conditioning. The alien seemed genuinely puzzled by human psychology and spent hours asking Jake questions about why his species would choose uncertainty and conflict over the guaranteed safety and happiness that the collective provided to all its member races. Through these conversations, Jake learned that the ethereal collective controlled 17 different star systems, each containing multiple worlds populated by species that had been peacefully conquered over thousands of years. The aliens maintained their empire through a combination of advanced technology, psychological conditioning, and genuine belief that they were helping primitive species evolve beyond their violent natures. The most disturbing revelation was that many of the conquered species had originally been as aggressive and independent as humans, but generations of conditioning had turned them into docile populations that could no longer even imagine resisting their alien overseers. Some had been under ethereal control for so long that their original cultures and identities had been completely erased. Dr. Amy Rodriguez had been working around the clock to develop methods for reversing the conditioning on a planetary scale. Her breakthrough came when she realized that the electromagnetic pulse technique could be modified to work through quantum communication networks that the ethereals used to coordinate their operations. By hijacking these networks, humanity could potentially free entire worlds simultaneously. Helen Carter now led Earth's provisional government and faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding human civilization while preparing for interstellar war. She had to coordinate with former enemies and rivals from around the world, uniting them behind the common goal of liberating the galaxy from ethereal control. The task seemed impossible, but Helen had learned that humans specialized in accomplishing impossible things when their freedom was at stake. Rick Barnes was training a new generation of liberation forces using tactics specifically designed to fight the ethereals and free conditioned populations. His soldiers learned not just combat techniques but also psychological warfare methods for awakening enslaved species and helping them remember their original identities and cultures. The Resistance had discovered that the ethereal fleet in Earth's orbit was essentially helpless without ground support and communication with their homeworlds. The aliens had never expected to face organized resistance and had no contingency plans for dealing with the species that refused to accept their benevolent guidance. Their ships were designed as mobile administrative centers rather than warships, and had minimal defensive capabilities. Jake's sister Lisa had become a general in the liberation forces and was working with Dr. Rodriguez to develop new technologies that combined human engineering with captured alien systems. Their goal was to create ships and weapons that could match ethereal technology while being operated by humans who understood warfare in ways the peaceful aliens never could. The first human liberation fleet was taking shape in orbital shipyards that had been hastily constructed using alien manufacturing technology. The ships were smaller and more aggressive than ethereal vessels, designed for speed and firepower rather than comfort and administrative efficiency. Each ship carried teams of liberation specialists trained to awaken conditioned populations and help them organize their own resistance movements. The ethereals in captivity had warned that other species in the collective would not welcome human liberation efforts. They explained that most conquered populations genuinely believed they were living better lives under ethereal guidance and would resist any attempt to free them from their peaceful existence. The conditioning process made victims grateful for their slavery and fearful of returning to their former independent lives. Jake understood that humanity faced a challenge unlike any in their history. They would have to fight not just the ethereals but also the very people they were trying to save. The liberation forces would need to overcome thousands of years of conditioning while fighting an enemy that controlled advanced technology and had the support of most of their own victims. The moral complexity of the situation weighed heavily on Jake as he prepared for the first liberation mission. The ethereals were not evil in any traditional sense and genuinely believed they were helping the species they conquered. Their victims were not suffering in ways they could recognize, having been conditioned to feel happy and fulfilled in their slavery. By human standards, the Collective was perhaps the most successful and benevolent empire in galactic history. But Jake also knew that true peace could only come from choice, not from imposed conditioning that eliminated the possibility of dissent or resistance. Freedom meant the right to make bad decisions, to suffer, to fight, and to fail. The ethereals offered safety and happiness at the cost of everything that made life worth living for a species like humanity. The day finally came when the first liberation fleet was ready to depart Earth. Jake stood on the bridge of the flagship, Defiance, as it prepared to leave the solar system for the first time in human history. The ship's destination was a world called Kepler 442b, home to a species that had been under ethereal control for over 2 centuries. Administrator Veltharion watched from the observation deck as the human fleet prepared to leave, still unable to understand why any species would choose the hardships of freedom over the comfort of guided existence. He had spent months studying human history and psychology, trying to find some explanation for their inexplicable behavior. As the Defiance engaged its faster-than-light drive, Jake thought about the words that had become the unofficial motto of the liberation forces. The aliens brought peace, we brought victory. The ethereals had indeed brought peace to the galaxy by eliminating choice and independent thought. Humanity would bring victory by restoring the right of every species to determine its own destiny, no matter how difficult or dangerous that might be. The journey to their first target would take weeks, giving Jake time to prepare his teams for what promised to be the most challenging military operation in human history. They would need to defeat an enemy that controlled superior technology, while convincing enslaved populations to embrace freedom they no longer wanted or understood. Lisa joined Jake on the bridge as Earth disappeared behind them, looking ahead, toward a future that would be determined by humanity's willingness to fight for principles that most of the galaxy had forgotten. The liberation of 17 star systems would take decades and cost countless lives, but Jake knew that some things were worth any price. The war for the soul of the galaxy had begun, and humanity would either free every enslaved species or die, trying. Because that was what humans did when faced with impossible odds and righteous causes. They fought, they struggled, and they never accepted that freedom was too expensive or too dangerous to be worth pursuing. The day of Operation Awakening arrived with perfect weather across most of the world, as if nature itself was cooperating with humanity's bid for freedom. Jake woke before dawn in his apartment, checking his equipment one final time before heading to what might be the most important day in human history. His secure communicator showed green lights from resistance cells on every continent, indicating that everyone was ready to move when the signal came. Lisa had spent the previous week organizing what appeared to be a peaceful cultural celebration in Central Park to honor humanity's integration with the ethereal collective. The event was scheduled to begin at noon local time in each major city around the world, creating a rolling wave of festivities that would provide perfect cover for the coordinated strikes against alien facilities. The ethereals were delighted by the cultural celebrations and had encouraged their expansion, seeing them as proof that humanity was finally embracing their place in the galactic community. Administrator Veltharion, the primary ethereal commander for North America, had even agreed to make a public appearance at the New York event to show his appreciation for human progress toward peaceful existence. Jake arrived at the administrative center early, using his liaison officer credentials to conduct what appeared to be routine security checks. In reality, he was placing small electromagnetic pulse devices at critical points throughout the building's communication and power systems. The devices were hidden inside ordinary maintenance equipment and would activate simultaneously when triggered by a signal from Helen's team. At exactly noon Eastern Time, the celebrations began in Central Park with traditional human music and dancing. The aliens watched with obvious pleasure as thousands of people gathered to supposedly celebrate their peaceful coexistence. Meanwhile, Resistance fighters disguised as performers and vendors moved into position around alien facilities throughout the city. The first phase of the operation began when Dr. Rodriguez activated a powerful electromagnetic pulse from a hidden transmitter in Brooklyn. The pulse was carefully tuned to disrupt the microscopic machines in human bloodstreams without causing permanent damage. Across the city, people who had been living under artificial conditioning suddenly felt their minds clearing for the first time in years. The effect was immediate and dramatic. People in the crowd at Central Park began looking around with confused expressions as their real personalities reasserted themselves. Parents remembered feeling concerned about their children's strange behavior. Workers recalled being angry about unfair policies, and former soldiers found themselves thinking about weapons and tactics for the first time since the occupation began. Jake was in the alien administrative building when the pulse hit, and he watched the ethereal staff react with alarm as their monitoring systems detected massive changes in human brain activity throughout the region. The aliens had never seen anything like it, and had no idea how to respond to an entire population suddenly breaking free from conditioning simultaneously. The second phase began as resistance fighters struck alien communication arrays and transportation hubs around the world. The attacks were precisely timed to prevent the ethereals from coordinating their response or calling for reinforcements from their home fleet. Within minutes, alien administrators found themselves cut off from each other and unable to understand what was happening to their carefully controlled human populations. Jake made his way to Administrator Veltharian's office as alarms began sounding throughout the building. The ethereal commander was standing at his window watching the crowd in Central Park with obvious distress, as thousands of humans began displaying the aggressive and unpredictable behavior that the conditioning was supposed to have eliminated forever. When Jake entered the office, Veltharian turned to him with relief visible in his large, kind eyes. He began speaking rapidly in his melodious voice about the need to increase harmony treatments and possibly relocate the affected humans to more controlled environments until their temporary madness could be cured. The alien genuinely believed that humanity was suffering from some kind of disease outbreak that was causing them to reject the peaceful existence he had worked so hard to provide. Jake listened to the alien's concerned rambling for several minutes before calmly informing him that the humans were not sick but simply free. He explained that the resistance had been working for years to understand and counter the ethereal conditioning process, and that what Veltharian was witnessing was humanity returning to its natural state of independent thought and aggressive determination. The administrator's reaction was exactly what Jake had expected based on his studies of ethereal psychology. Veltharian could not comprehend the concept of a coordinated deception lasting for years, or the idea that beings would choose conflict over the peace he was offering them. He kept insisting that there must be some misunderstanding and that the humans would surely return to their grateful acceptance once their temporary confusion passed. Outside, the third phase of Operation Awakening was beginning as Rick's trained fighters moved against alien security forces throughout the city. The ethereals had minimal defensive capabilities because they had never needed them, and their security personnel were completely unprepared for the kind of ruthless tactics that humans considered standard in warfare. The aliens' advanced weapons were useless when they could not bring themselves to use them against beings they still considered their charges rather than enemies. The ethereal security forces had been trained to subdue and control rather than fight, and they simply had no response to humans who attacked with lethal intent and tactical coordination. Jake took Veltharian prisoner using nothing more than physical restraint, something that would have been impossible against a human opponent but was easily accomplished against an alien who had never experienced violence and could not bring himself to resist effectively. The administrator continued pleading for Jake to explain why humanity was choosing suffering over the happiness that the collective could provide. Across the world, similar scenes were playing out as resistance fighters captured alien administrators and shut down their control systems. The ethereal's entire operational structure collapsed within hours because they had never imagined that a species under their guidance would be capable of organizing such a comprehensive rebellion. The fourth phase involved broadcasting the truth about the conditioning process to every human on Earth using captured alien communication systems. Helen's teams had prepared detailed presentations explaining how the ethereals had been slowly enslaving humanity through biological and psychological manipulation disguised as medical care and social improvement. The response from the newly awakened human population was immediate and explosive. People who had spent years feeling artificially grateful to their alien benefactors suddenly understood that they had been living as drugged slaves in a beautiful prison. The rage that followed was unlike anything the ethereals had ever encountered in thousands of years of conquering other species. Jake stood with his prisoner in the administrative center's command room, watching reports flood in from around the world as humanity threw off its chains and reclaimed its freedom. Feltharian watched the displays with growing horror as he realized that his species' perfect system of peaceful conquest had been completely defeated by creatures he had considered barely civilized. In the final hours of the day, Jake received confirmation that every major ethereal facility on Earth had been captured or destroyed, and that the alien fleet in orbit was completely cut off from their ground forces. Humanity had won its first victory against the collective, but Jake knew this was only the beginning of a much larger conflict that would determine the fate of countless species across the galaxy. Jake spent the next several months walking a dangerous line between his public role as a loyal liaison officer and his secret work with the Resistance. Every day brought new challenges as he gathered intelligence while pretending that the conditioning was working perfectly on him. He had to act grateful and peaceful while burning with rage at what the aliens were doing to his species. The Resistance network had grown significantly as Helen and Rick found more people who could fight off the effects of the harmony treatments. Dr. Amy Rodriguez had successfully developed a way to reverse the conditioning using targeted electromagnetic pulses, though the process remained risky and extremely painful. The treatment had to be done carefully in hidden medical facilities that the Resistance had set up in abandoned buildings and underground locations. Jake underwent the reversal treatment in a makeshift clinic, hidden beneath an old warehouse in Brooklyn. The electromagnetic pulses felt like lightning running through his brain and left him unconscious for 2 days. When he woke up, the difference was immediate and shocking. The cotton-wrapped feeling that had dulled his thoughts for years was completely gone, replaced by a clarity of mind that felt almost overwhelming after so long under alien influence. With his mind fully clear for the first time since the occupation began, Jake threw himself into intelligence gathering with new determination. His position gave him access to ethereal administrative centers throughout the city, and he began studying their technology and behavior patterns with the eye of a trained military officer rather than a conditioned civilian. The aliens' greatest weakness became obvious once Jake knew what to look for. The ethereals had no understanding of deception or strategic thinking, because their species had evolved beyond such concepts thousands of years ago. They took everything at face value and could not imagine that the humans they were conditioning might be capable of complex plans or coordinated resistance. Jake discovered that the alien command structure was surprisingly simple and centralized. Each major city had one primary administrator who coordinated all ethereal activities in that region. The administrators communicated with each other and with the main fleet through quantum communication systems that could be disrupted if someone knew the right frequencies and methods. Rick Barnes had been busy recruiting and training resistance fighters from around the world. The former SEAL had established training camps in remote locations where people who had undergone the reversal treatment could learn to fight effectively against alien technology. The training focused on guerrilla tactics, electronic warfare, and psychological operations, designed to exploit the ethereal's mental blind spots. The Resistance discovered that human creativity and adaptability gave them significant advantages over their alien captors. The ethereals relied heavily on their advanced technology and had difficulty improvising when their systems were disrupted or used in unexpected ways. Humans, on the other hand, had spent millennia learning to fight with whatever tools were available and could turn almost anything into a weapon when necessary. Helen Carter had been working on the most crucial part of the Resistance plan, figuring out how to wake up the rest of humanity. The conditioning made most people actively resist any information that challenged their belief in ethereal benevolence, but Helen had found ways to plant seeds of doubt that could grow slowly over time. TD. Key was to use the aliens' own peaceful nature against them. Helen's teams began spreading subtle rumors and asking innocent questions that highlighted small inconsistencies in the ethereal narrative. They would wonder aloud why the aliens never allowed humans to visit their home worlds, or why certain areas of their ships were always off limits to human personnel. Jake's sister Lisa had begun to show signs of breaking free from her conditioning after several months of careful exposure to these questioning techniques. She started asking Jake about things that bothered her but that she could not quite articulate. The process was slow and frustrating, but Jake could see his real sister beginning to emerge from behind the artificial contentment that had replaced her personality. Dr. Rodriguez made a breakthrough discovery while studying captured alien technology. The ethereal ships and equipment were incredibly advanced, but also completely dependent on central control systems. If those systems could be disrupted simultaneously across multiple locations, the aliens would lose most of their technological advantages and be unable to coordinate their response to a coordinated attack. The Resistance began planning what Rick called Operation Awakening, a simultaneous worldwide strike designed to cripple ethereal command and control, while broadcasting the truth about the conditioning to every human on Earth. The plan required precise timing and coordination between resistance cells on every continent, but the potential payoff was enormous. Jake's role in the operation was to gather detailed intelligence about the New York Administrative Center and identify the best ways to disable its communication and transportation systems. He spent weeks mapping the building's layout, learning guard routines, and studying the alien equipment that controlled local operations. The more Jake learned about ethereal technology, the more confident he became that the plan could succeed. The aliens had built their systems assuming that no one would ever try to attack them, so their security was designed to prevent accidents rather than deliberate sabotage. A small team of humans with the right knowledge and equipment could probably shut down an entire administrative center within minutes. Lisa finally broke free from her conditioning completely during a conversation with Jake about their childhood memories. Something about remembering their father's military service and the stories he had told them about fighting for freedom triggered a cascade of awareness that washed away years of artificial contentment. She broke down crying as she realized how much of herself she had lost, and how blind she had been to what was happening around her. With Lisa awake and angry, Jake had a powerful ally inside the food distribution system that the aliens used to maintain control over human populations. She began recruiting other workers who showed signs of breaking free from their conditioning, building a network that could disrupt food supplies to alien facilities when the time came for action. Rick sent word through the secure communication network that resistance cells around the world were ready to move. The reversal treatments had been successful enough to create a core of fighters who could think clearly and act decisively. More importantly, the slow awakening process had begun to create doubt and confusion among the general population, making them more receptive to the truth when it was finally revealed. Jake stood on his apartment balcony one evening, looking up at the ethereal ships that had dominated Earth's skies for nearly 4 years. Soon those ships would face something their creators had never imagined, a species that chose to fight for its freedom rather than accept comfortable slavery. The aliens had brought peace to Earth, but humanity was about to show them what victory really meant. Jake Morrison stood at the window of his office on the 40th floor, watching the alien ships hover silently above New York City. The massive vessels looked like floating crystals, their surfaces shimmering with soft blue light that never hurt the eyes. 3 years had passed since the day they arrived, and Jake still remembered how different everything felt back then. The ethereals had come without warning, but also without weapons. Their ships simply appeared in the sky above every major city on Earth, broadcasting the same message in every human language. They called themselves peaceful visitors who wanted to help humanity join a greater community of species across the galaxy. They spoke of ending hunger, disease, and war forever. Jake had been a captain in the Space Force when it happened. He remembered the panic in the command centers, the desperate attempts to ready Earth's defenses, and then the strange calm that followed when nothing violent occurred. The aliens just waited, sending down small groups of their people to meet with world leaders. They looked almost human, but taller and thinner, with skin that seemed to glow from within and large eyes that held infinite kindness. The negotiations lasted only weeks. The ethereals offered everything humanity had ever dreamed of: medicine that could cure any disease, technology that could provide unlimited clean energy, and wisdom gained from thousands of years of peaceful existence. In return, they asked for very little. They wanted to set up administrative centers in major cities and help guide humanity toward a more peaceful way of life. They promised that humans would keep their freedom and their governments, with only minor changes to help reduce conflict and suffering. Most people celebrated when the agreement was signed. Jake remembered the parties in the streets, the hope in people's eyes, and the feeling that humanity had finally grown up enough to join something bigger than itself. The aliens moved quickly to fulfill their promises. Hospitals received new equipment that could heal injuries in hours instead of months. Power plants were replaced with clean energy systems that needed no fuel. Food production increased dramatically, with new farming techniques that needed no chemicals or pesticides. But Jake had started to notice things that bothered him. Small things at first, like how all the world's armies were disbanded within the first year. The Ethereals explained that military forces were no longer needed since they would protect Earth from any outside threats. They also said that weapons and soldiers were reminders of humanity's violent past that would slow down their progress toward true peace. Jake now worked as a liaison officer between the human population and the Ethereal administration in New York. His job involved helping humans understand new policies and making sure everything ran smoothly in the city. The aliens were always polite and seemed genuinely concerned about human welfare, but something felt wrong about the whole situation. The most disturbing thing Jake noticed was what happened to people over time. At first, everyone seemed happier and more relaxed. Crime rates dropped to almost zero, and people stopped arguing about politics or fighting over resources. The aliens said this was natural progress as humanity learned to live in peace. But Jake saw his friends and colleagues becoming different in ways that worried him. People seemed less interested in taking risks or trying new things. They accepted whatever the aliens suggested without asking many questions. Even his own sister, Lisa, who had been a tough Marine sergeant, now worked quietly in food distribution and rarely talked about anything except how grateful she felt for the aliens' help. When Jake tried to discuss his concerns with her, she just smiled and said he was worrying too much about nothing important. The monthly visits to the wellness centers bothered Jake most of all. Every human on Earth was required to visit these facilities for health checkups and what the aliens called harmony adjustments. The centers were beautiful places filled with soft music and comfortable furniture. The checkups involved lying on a warm table while gentle machines scanned the body and made tiny corrections to ensure perfect health. Jake had been through the process many times, but he always felt strange afterward. Not sick or hurt, just different somehow, like part of his mind had been wrapped in cotton. The feeling usually wore off after a few days, but he noticed that most people seemed to keep that wrapped feeling permanently. They moved through their days with calm smiles and never seemed angry or frustrated about anything. The aliens explained that the harmony adjustments helped reduce stress and negative emotions that could harm human health. They said that anger, fear, and aggressive thoughts were like poison in the mind that prevented true happiness and peace. The treatments simply helped people let go of these harmful feelings so they could enjoy their new peaceful lives. During his work, Jake spent time in the alien administrative centers and observed how the Ethereals behaved when they thought no humans were watching. They moved in groups and seemed nervous around certain areas of the city, especially places with lots of metal structures or electronic equipment. They also talked among themselves in their own language, using sounds that human ears could barely hear. One day, Jake overheard a conversation between two ethereal administrators that made his blood run cold. They were discussing something they called the harvest schedule, and mentioned that Earth's population was responding to conditioning faster than expected. When they noticed Jake nearby, they quickly switched to speaking English and acted as if they had been discussing weather patterns. That night, Jake sat in his apartment trying to make sense of what he had heard. The word conditioning stuck in his mind like a splinter. He thought about all the changes he had seen in people, the monthly wellness visits, and the way everyone seemed to accept everything without question. He began to wonder if the peace that humanity was experiencing was really freedom or something else entirely. Jake looked out his window at the alien ships floating in the darkness above the city. Their gentle blue light seemed less comforting now and more like the glow of a predator's eyes watching sleeping prey. He decided that he needed to start paying closer attention to what was really happening to his species, even if no one else seemed to care anymore. 6 months had passed since Jake started watching the aliens more carefully, and what he discovered made him sick with worry. The changes in humanity were not natural progress toward peace, but something much darker. He had begun keeping notes in a hidden notebook, recording everything he noticed about the ethereal administration and the way people behaved after their monthly visits to the wellness centers. The breakthrough came when Jake received a coded message slipped under his apartment door. The note contained only an address and a time, but something about the handwriting looked familiar. Against his better judgment, Jake decided to follow the instructions and found himself standing outside an abandoned subway entrance in Lower Manhattan at midnight. A figure emerged from the shadows and Jake recognized Helen Carter, a woman he had worked with briefly during his Space Force days. Helen had been a CIA operative before the aliens arrived and disbanded all intelligence agencies. She looked older and thinner than Jake remembered, but her eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made her one of the best agents in the service. Helen led Jake down into the old subway tunnels through passages that had been sealed off since the aliens arrived. They walked for nearly an hour before reaching a hidden chamber that had been converted into a basic command center. Jake was amazed to see nearly 20 people working quietly at computers and communication equipment, all of them former military or intelligence personnel that he recognized. The leader of the group was Rick Barnes, a former Navy SEAL commander who had supposedly died in a training accident 2 years earlier. Rick explained that his death had been faked by sympathetic colleagues who suspected something was wrong with the alien occupation. Since then, he had been building a network of people who had somehow avoided or resisted the effects of the Harmony treatments. Rick showed Jake files and photographs that revealed the true nature of the ethereal presence on Earth. The aliens had not come to help humanity, but to harvest it. The 17 other species they claimed to have peacefully integrated into their collective had actually been turned into docile slave populations through biological and psychological conditioning. The monthly wellness visits were not health checkups but conditioning sessions. Each visit involved injecting microscopic machines into human bloodstreams that traveled to the brain and slowly altered its chemistry. The machines reduced aggression, independent thinking, and the desire to question authority. Over time, they turned humans into happy, obedient workers who genuinely believed they were living better lives. Helen had been investigating the declining birth rates that had puzzled scientists since the aliens arrived. Her research revealed that the conditioning process also included fertility controls designed to reduce human population over several generations. The aliens wanted enough humans to serve as workers, but not so many that they might become difficult to control. The most disturbing discovery was what had happened to the other species in the ethereal collective. Rick showed Jake holographic records stolen from alien databases that revealed the true fate of civilizations that had accepted ethereal guidance. Each species had gone through the same process: peaceful contact, generous offers of help, gradual conditioning, and finally, complete subjugation. The aliens had perfected their technique over thousands of years of conquering worlds. They had learned that violent conquest created broken populations that were difficult to manage and often rebelled. Instead, they used kindness and generosity to make their victims grateful for their own enslavement. By the time most species realized what was happening, the conditioning had advanced too far for them to resist effectively. Jake learned that the resistance network had discovered a critical weakness in the alien plan. The ethereals had never encountered a species like humanity that had evolved through constant warfare and competition. Humans possessed a stubborn streak and capacity for violence that the conditioning machines struggled to completely suppress. Some people, especially those with military training or strong personalities, could resist the effects longer than others. The resistance had also learned important facts about the ethereals themselves. Despite their advanced technology, they were physically weak and emotionally fragile. They could not understand concepts like deception, surprise attacks, or fighting dirty to win. Their peaceful nature, while genuine, made them incapable of predicting or defending against the kind of ruthless tactics that humans considered normal in warfare. Helen explained that the resistance faced a huge problem in trying to wake up the rest of humanity. Most people genuinely believed the aliens were helping them and felt grateful for the peace and prosperity they had brought. Even when presented with evidence of the conditioning, many humans refused to believe it or dismissed it as the ravings of disturbed individuals who could not accept positive change. The conditioning process had been designed to make victims defend their captors. People who had undergone the harmony treatments felt physically uncomfortable when exposed to ideas that challenged the ethereal narrative. Their altered brain chemistry made them naturally reject information that might disturb their artificial sense of peace and contentment. Rick showed Jake a map of resistance cells that had been established in major cities around the world. Each cell operated independently and had only limited contact with others to prevent the entire network from being discovered if one group was captured. The cells worked carefully to identify and recruit people who showed signs of resisting the conditioning, usually former military personnel, scientists, or individuals with naturally suspicious personalities. The resistance had been working on ways to reverse the conditioning process. A scientist named Amy Rodriguez, who had been working at a remote research station in Antarctica when the aliens arrived, had avoided the treatments entirely and was studying the microscopic machines in secret. She had made progress in developing electromagnetic treatments that could destroy the machines in human brains, but the process was dangerous and painful. Jake felt overwhelmed by everything he had learned. The scope of the alien deception was far beyond anything he had imagined. Humanity was not joining a peaceful galactic community, but being slowly transformed into another species of slaves for creatures that viewed them as resources rather than equals. As the meeting ended, Helen gave Jake a small device that would allow him to communicate securely with the resistance network. She warned him that his position as a liaison officer made him valuable for gathering intelligence but also put him in constant danger of discovery. If the aliens suspected his true loyalties, he would disappear like so many others who had asked too many questions about the New World Order. Jake returned to his apartment as dawn broke over New York City, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. He looked up at the alien ships floating peacefully in the morning sky and felt a burning anger that surprised him with its intensity. The conditioning machines in his blood had not been able to completely suppress his human nature, and that gave him hope that humanity might still have a chance to fight back against their gentle captors.